You kicked him out of your bed, but he still sleeps on the floor. He has a name, but we don't say it anymore. That might make...
Hey everybody, welcome to the newest episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. Today's guest joins me from Los Angeles, California. He's an indie singer-songwriter, producer, and multi-instrumentalist who's got a new album called 100 Breakfasts with the Book out on Lobby Art Records. You can check it out on Spotify and Bandcamp. But before we get this episode started, please make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And on that note, please welcome Ben Varian. All right, I'm sitting here with Ben Varian, an indie singer-songwriter, producer, and multi-instrumentalist based in Los Angeles, California. I'm really excited to have you on to talk about your newest album, 100 Breakfasts with the Book, which came out January 29th, out on Lobby Art Records. It's a nice jazzy pop album, and I love the tongue-in-cheek humor that kind of permeates through all the lyrics. I usually like to start the episodes asking about your writing and recording process, and since you have so many records out on Bandcamp, I just wanted to ask you if you had any kind of different approach to this newest album, or if you went into it with a different state of mind compared to your previous releases.
I did actually. Is very different because normally I sort of write and record simultaneously. This one I made demos for the first time. It was a way longer process. I wrote the songs, made demos, then went in and actually recorded at a studio, and then really took my time with the mixing and figuring out the arrangements and stuff. So the first part of making the demos was very much like how I normally make an album, which is just very quick, getting ideas out and stuff. And normally I would leave it at that, and then this time I decided to go another round to kind of polish things and get a better sound.
Gotcha. So do you feel like you enjoyed this process more or less than your other releases, or maybe just in general, it was just a little different?
I'm more proud of the result for sure. The process was less fun, to be honest, because there was more sort of redoing things that I had already done, just to get a better sound and stuff. Some of the songs, the demo and the end result are basically the same, except for everything's just re-recorded with better gear and stuff. So there was some kind of busy work aspects that weren't that fun, but I think it was worth it because since I mix my own stuff, I made myself a much easier job mixing it without recording it very shittily and then having to figure out how to make it sound better in the mix.
Yeah, that is a hard lesson that took me a long time to learn, which is, and as they say in film, don't fix it in post.
Hmm.
It's going to save you a lot more time in the long run if you make sure that the recording itself is as clear and good as you can make it, so that when you are doing the mixing, it's already sounding pretty great and you don't have to do too much to it to fix little things.
Exactly. Yeah.
So on your previous releases, did you feel like you were going for maybe a more just off the cuff approach compared to this one?
Yeah. I call it mid-fi, or it's kind of right between lo-fi and hi-fi. And I also call it living room pop instead of bedroom pop because takes a little more space. I'll I would always take some care to mic up the drums and just make it sound as good as I could, but also just kind of try to knock everything out. Once I have a song sort of written in my head, I would try to knock it out in a day or two. So I wouldn't let the process of getting the right sounds slow me down. It was kind of all about momentum for me, and it still sort of is.
Mm. When I'm writing a song, I really feel like I have to try to get it all done or as much as I can done in a day. Otherwise, it's probably not happening. Do you feel similar to writing or maybe even just the recording process of that?
I think I used to feel more like that. Um, Lately, it's been taking longer and longer. to finish a song, which is kind of cool. I've gotten better at being able to just like set something aside. If maybe I've written like a verse, I'll just and something else is not coming immediately, I'll just set it aside. And then I find that things just like stay in my head and it'll pop back up somewhere down the line and like get stuck in my head. And then my brain will just automatically sort of like add the next part. It's a lot of just like looping the same thing over and over in my mind until it fills in the next part automatically without having to really try.
Yeah, do you have to listen to it on repeat, like listen to the demo on repeat, or is it easier for you to put it away for a minute and then come back?
I actually tend to not even start recording um, until I have a song mostly written in my head. Like a lot of it takes place just um, I'm imagining what it's going to sound like, but sometimes if I start recording it too early, I'll sort of like lose the magic of it. You have
Mhm.
to kind of like imagine it sounding amazing in your head for as long as possible, and that will inspire you to keep working on it. For me, if I like sometimes if I start working on something and I don't really know where it's going yet, then that can be really discouraging.
That's interesting. I feel like I'm with you there for sure because there's been so many times where I start recording a song and uh, am either not quite sure where it's going to go or I just have the basic outline of it and haven't spent enough time imagining what it can be. Um, but I also feel like for me, there's been plenty of times where I've had something on repeat. Like I've recorded like a demo of something and just have it on repeat. And that's like the only way I can imagine it going any further because if I don't listen to it, it's like hard to know where it could go. So it's kind of a
Totally.
weird fine line, I guess, to ride.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing, just different like ways of getting there. You know, for me, I like to keep it in my head, but it's doing the same thing, just like listening over and over, imagining what could come next, and just like waiting, trusting that something will come eventually, and not trying to force it.
Hmm. Do you have a particular part of the creation process that you enjoy the most? Because you do everything. I mean, you write, you record, you produce. Is there a specific part that really sticks out to you?
I feel like the beginning and the end are both really satisfying because the beginning is when it could be anything, and you still are imagining that it could be this perfect thing that you hear inside your head. Um, so that's really exciting. And then the end is like the pressure is off to try to come up with ideas. Now you have to commit to what you've done. At least that's the way I do it. I try not to go back too much and change things. So it's like the pressure is off to like come up with the actual ideas, and now it's almost as if I'm like putting on a different hat, and now it's just my job to like polish it and make it sound as good as possible. And that's when I start to be able to distance myself from it enough to actually listen to it as a listener and like enjoy it just as like a song, you know?
Yeah, the middle section can be brutal and grueling because
Yes.
you have that perfect idea of what you want, and there'll be days where you are spending maybe way too much time than you should on like a snare or this one guitar line, and it can be so frustrating. So I know what you mean when you say the beginning's the best, and so is the end because it's like
Yeah.
it could be anything. It's that potential energy. But then at
Yeah.
the end, it's like, all right, now you're listening to it as like a listener instead of just you.
Right. And there's a lot of parts in the middle that are obviously enjoyable too, like little breakthroughs that you make that
Mm,
are you feel like you're finding the path or something, like, you know, a signpost in the right direction. But yeah, in between for me it's like there's a lot of self-doubt and a lot of like it's just like getting through like the weeds, the thick forest to try to like come out the other side, you know.
right. Is there a song on this new record that you're particularly proud of?
I'm pretty proud of all of them, to be honest. Like, um, hopefully it's no filler type of album. I don't know. I think I sequenced it in a way that is sort of like here's the best stuff up front in a way. Although other people have told me that like they feel it's the opposite and the best stuff is all at the end. But It actually changed a lot over the course of making the album because this was such a long process from starting to write to finally being done. Like, I changed the order of the songs so many times because I wanted to put the ones that I liked the best first. Um, so I feel like the way that it came out was almost like a snapshot of like where I was at that moment. I haven't really listened to it that much since then, honestly. So if I listened to it now, maybe I would have a different approach. So it's not like here's my first, second, third favorite, but it is sort of like let's open with the stuff that I'm like really hoping will grab people, and then like save some of that stuff that like you kind of have to be with me along for the ride already. I put some of that stuff more close to the end. So hopefully people are like drawn in by the stuff at first, and then they get to know me and like my style and like what I'm trying to do with this album, so they're like with me by the time they get to the second part, you know.
Yeah, it is a journey of an album, I think, and but it starts strong, it ends strong. I think that's an interesting thing you say about sequencing, like putting all the strong stuff. You thought you put the strong stuff up front, and then the audience hears something different.
Yeah.
Like you can do everything you can to make it the way you think it should sound, and the audience can hear it totally differently, which is it's just such a weird thing, and you can't really prepare for something like that.
Yeah, you just have to accept that your own perspective is really limited, and like I mean each of the songs was probably my favorite song as I was first writing it, when it was in that like infinite potential stage. And so they all have the capacity to be like the best song on the album, but it kind of comes down to individual preference, I guess, you know. And even just like, you know, that could change over time. It definitely did for me.
Yeah, it's interesting how our own perceptions of these songs that we create do change over time because we change in
Yeah.
radical ways.
Yeah, totally.
So, something I like to talk about on this show with people, and a reason why I started it, is because I love to talk about the DIY mentality of things. And you're certainly a prime example of somebody who likes to take the DIY approach. So, as somebody who wears all these hats at once, like being a singer songwriter, doing the recording, doing the producing, how do you wear all these hats at once? How do you make sure to balance it? Do you have any advice for other artists who are trying to be, multifaceted in that way?
Yeah. I think in the past, uh, I would sort of try to do it all at once, like writing, recording, producing. You know, like I would maybe create the first part of a song and like do all of the arrangement, put all of the effects that I was gonna put on it, do it all, and then I'm like, okay, now what's the next part of the song? And that worked, but I think I came to a point where I couldn't get the sound that I wanted doing it that way. I couldn't get things, I guess, just like wanting things to sound a little more natural, even though they aren't natural because it's just like a million overdubs. Just wanting things to sound a little more cohesive, I had to sort of step back and like sort of start by imagining the entire thing as if it was done and trying to hear it all in my head, and then break it down into steps. So yeah, just like tracking stuff and not putting effects on it, or not like figuring out, um, I don't know, there's just a lot of things that you can get caught up in, if you're not just like super focused in, like I'm just recording this today and then I'm going to go home, and then, you know, someday down the line I'm going to come back and revisit this and like make it sound better, you know. So I think like separating the steps, I really resisted that for a long time because it didn't feel natural. um, and everything is fluid with me, like I might go back to the way I did things a few years ago, but in this case for my last album it did really help me to get a sound that sounded a little more natural, a little more almost like live in the studio at times, even though it never was.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree with that because tomorrow, actually, I'm going to Philadelphia to record an EP with a previous On That Note guest, Kevin Basco from Rubber Band Gun. And he challenged me to write the songs like all done and then bring them to him. And then we start recording. And that's never how I've done it. It's always been recording as I write it, which to me, I don't know about you, it's fun because it's like I'm already getting it down,
Yeah.
but it's can be very detrimental because like you don't really focus on the writing process part of it. But I would like to see, how it goes if you go back to that approach, having just done something that feels more natural sounding.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, I have a few songs that I'm working on that like I went even further in the direction of like separating those parts where like for the first time, and I've been meaning to do this forever, I just never have like maybe had the confidence to do it, but I wrote songs that you could just like play on a guitar. You could just like they're just like strumming chords, like very simple songs. I feel like I always was a little too nervous to do that because I didn't I was just insecure like if you don't do something impressive, people won't think you're good enough or something like that. But I think I'm finally getting beyond that. So I'm now like writing these very simple songs that you could like strip away all of the other stuff and it would just be like a guitar and a voice. But then I'm pretending like I'm a whole new person approaching the song that's just guitar and vocals, and then I'm allowing myself to just go nuts with the arrangement and like do whatever I feel like, as if someone handed me these songs and was like, just do whatever you want, and that's been really fun.
That's awesome. It is funny how we can get distracted by throwing in all the bells and whistles, and it can come from our own feeling of not being enough or having to prove something, when in reality, sometimes the best stuff that we make is simple.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm still struggling with that. And like, I still am dressing up these songs with like so many overdubs, so many, like, I've always made really busy music and I'm not like shying away from that. I probably never will because it's really fun and hopefully fun to listen to. But yeah, just I feel like having the core of the song be something that I could just sit down and play and it wouldn't lose its essential nature. I think the further I go back into my older music, the more it would lose, the more the songs would lose like their character if you stripped away all of the overdubs and stuff. Because there is nothing at the core of some of them, they're all sort of just a bunch of overdubs coming together.
You said earlier that this new album you brought it to a bigger studio setting. So how was it working in a bigger studio versus working in your living room or your bedroom? What were the pros and cons of doing either or?
Yeah, I recorded it, most of it at my friend Johnny's studio, and he lived just like a few blocks. It was like we had for a long time now. We've always just kind of like messed around in his studio and like just made music for fun. So I was like super comfortable with him in the studio. It didn't feel like this thing of like going into a new studio that can be like really intimidating. His setup is like it's the perfect combination of like it's professional. He's got the mixing board and like the separation between the mixing room and the tracking room and all that, but it doesn't feel like sterile and like intimidating. So um and he was like, I mean, he's like one of my really good friends and he did a great job of like keeping me positive when I was like trying to play these parts over and over again that are like a little beyond, like I always write things that are a little beyond my actual abilities, so it takes me a lot of tries to get them right. And he did a great job like engineering. He mic'd stuff and made it, I mean, the end result is it just sounds way better. And then I did a little bit of like overdubs and stuff at home, but yeah, the reason the new album sounds better is definitely because it was recorded there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So have you been to a bigger studio before, or was this the first time recording in that space?
For my music, I have not, but yeah, I've had some experience playing in other studios, some better than others, but I find, and it's nothing against the studios themselves, it's just my perception. Like the more professional it feels, the more kind of sterile it starts to feel to me, and the less I feel like I can like stretch out and like try things and be in the moment. So I have my own studio, which is where I am right now, and it's very, very. It's really just like a corner of a room, in what used to be a Pilates studio. It's now like a shared art studio. Um, and it's very much feels like someone's living room or something. And that's the vibe I much prefer for recording.
Interesting. I do think that there is something to be said for recording in your own space that feels comfortable. Like, yeah, it's good to get out of your comfort zone, but when it comes to trying things and really stretching yourself, like, especially with singing, I don't want to be in a place that feels like there's 10 people watching me,
Yeah,
like
it's a
doing my
nightmare.
vocal takes. Yeah, it's a nightmare. I'd rather be literally in my closet with this exact microphone singing and doing like 20 takes and knowing I'm fucking up about 90% of them. And it's like it's I'm able to experiment more and have fun with it. And I would see how being in maybe a bigger studio setting could be hard, but if, like you said, you have a very comfortable bigger studio setting, then maybe that is a nice thing. So what kind of advice would you give to an artist who's trying to decide, oh, should I go to a bigger studio or should I invest maybe in some basic home studio equipment to get this off the ground?
I would always advise people to like record at home, because like the amount of money that you'd pay to record, like if you were paying full price at a professional studio, even to just record a few songs, you could create an entire home studio setup for that much money. So I mean, the only reason I recorded it in a studio this time was because, first of all, it was my friend. He was like really chill about the money. I paid him just as much as I could, and second of all, it was like um someone who I felt really comfortable with, and it was just me and him in there. So yeah, if I were gonna tell anybody anything, I mean, first of all, I tell them to do whatever they want and just learn from it. Learn what's best for them. But from my own experience, definitely like recording at home, or like, I mean, what I have now is what I'd like advise to anyone if it's possible, is just like a little setup somewhere that's not necessarily in your home. I mean, this would be in my home if I had space, but like just have your own space where you can like experiment and be creative, and just a completely non-judgmental situation. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The most important thing is a non judgmental situation because it's already easy to get in your own head by yourself. You don't need other elements, making it worse for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know you do a lot of work for others, other artists doing mixing, producing, and things like that. Do you have a typical approach when it comes to working with others versus on working your own stuff, or is it pretty similar?
It's pretty different, and it's still something I'm learning, which is to like fully embody someone else's vision, and try to stay within their vision, because when I'm working on my own stuff, it's very free, and there's a lot of experimentation, and there's almost an attitude of like, I'm going to try something that's wrong on purpose, you know to see what happens, or just to like prove that you can do whatever you want. But obviously that doesn't work for most other people. They have like a vision, which I totally respect. So it's all about not just staying within the bounds of their vision, but also trying to see like if you can take it even further in that direction. So there's definitely like research involved. I like to get people to send me their inspirations and stuff, and try to like, I'm not too into like copying techniques, like recording techniques, mixing techniques, things like that from people's inspirations, but more like I want to really get in the mindset of like, how does this music make you feel, and really like stick to that and try to go deeper into that. Whereas with my own music, I'm more just like, let's try something and just see what happens.
I'd imagine it's a pretty nice break being able to work for other people and get their stuff to a certain place as opposed to, uh, being in a space where you feel like you have to constantly do your own thing. Otherwise, you're stuck.
hmm
You know,
And I learn a lot from other people's, just their songs, like their arrangements. Like actually being able to dive into their songs, like dissect it, see all the tracks, see what's going on. Yeah, I've definitely learned a lot from that like I can use in my own music.
Yeah, that's a great little. I almost imagine like recycling. That's not really what it is, but you're taking in things constantly from other people that have a plethora of different experiences than you, and you can use that for your own stuff later on. It's pretty helpful. That's how I feel about this podcast, being able to talk with so many artists that I look up to that are incredibly talented, and being able to learn from them some techniques and just pick their brain about how their creative process is, and be able to see like they have the exact same doubts and inspirations as I do. We're all the same. We're all trying to get to a certain place and enjoy the ride along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you're working for isolation for long enough, then eventually you're going to reach a dead end. Like you need collaboration, and you need like inspiration from other people, and just like the energy being passed back and forth. That's like such a crucial part of like creating anything, you know.
Absolutely, 100%. That's going to take us over to the last five here, where I'm just going to ask you five quick questions and we'll be done.
All right.
All right, first one is in the studio or playing live?
In the studio.
Yeah, I would have guessed just because you have so many records out there.
Yeah, I have stage fright. I love playing live, but it's more like something to conquer, like rather than something that necessarily like builds me up.
Mm. So why would you say the studio means so much to you?
I don't know. That's where like the creative process mostly happens for me. I mean, playing live is more a way just get out there and like have music interact with other people out in the world. Um, but it's not so much like an end in itself as much as like the studio is where like the sort of like genesis of that whole process happens.
Yeah, there's something cool about taking nothing and making it into something.
Yeah, totally.
Question number two is, to you, what is a perfect album front to back?
Oof. Like an example of a perfect album?
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I ask that and people will be like, the perfect album is an album that makes you want to take the long way home so you can
Yeah,
listen to the whole thing. I'm like, well,
yeah.
that's not what I asked, but pretty cool.
I'll give you the short answer, which is Steely Dan Gaucho.
Ooh, okay. I started listening to the full albums by Steely Dan, but I haven't listened to that full album.
Yeah, it's basically their last album, if you don't count like the reunion albums. So, you know, you can build up to it.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'll take the journey there because I listened to the first two, and what's the first one called?
Can't Buy a
With
Thrill.
Yeah, Can't Buy a Thrill. It's
Yeah.
incredible. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
It's an amazing album.
So, what about Gaucho makes you feel like it's a perfect album?
I mean, it's kind of the easy answer because it's like the most, in a lot of people's opinion, and kind of mine too, it's like the most perfect sounding album. Like it's like the peak of that like 70s hi-fi like perfectionism. And then also what I love about Steely Dan is they're funny, and the lyrics are um you can hear them in different ways. If you're listening closely, you can follow a whole like satire and understand that this song is like making fun of the specific kind of people that you might think that they actually are if you weren't listening closely, if that makes sense. Like if you heard a line here and there, you would think like these guys are kind of like weird and off-putting, but then you understand this song is sung from the perspective of a weird off-putting guy, and then it all clicks. And yeah, I could go on and on about that, but I'll save it. I'll save it for my Steely Dan podcast.
Yeah, are you gonna start a Steely Dan podcast? I'd like to hear it.
Probably not, but yeah, I'll just keep talking to my friends about it endlessly.
There you go. I would. It reminds me of some of the tongue-in-cheek lyrics that are on your album. I feel like every song has just some witty lines throughout.
I feel like humor is really important, not for everybody's music. I mean, like I don't think there is one thing that everyone should do, but for me, like humor is super important because I do want to write about things that are like big and important, and like, you know, the big questions in life, but like I want to do it to talk about them in the way that they really appear in our lives, which is often like strange and funny and like in unexpected ways.
Mm-hmm.
So humor helps to sort of like mitigate that seriousness that otherwise might just get boring or like preachy or something like that.
Yeah. Did you ever get to learn saxophone?
I'm working on it right now, actually.
Nice. There's a lot
I
of
can,
saxophone lines on the album.
yeah, and I didn't play any of the sax on that album, but I actually have started playing saxophone on my new songs. I'm learning bit by bit.
Nice. Yeah, I always thought that would be a fun one to learn.
Yeah.
Question number 3 is who's your dream artist or producer to work with?
I don't know. I don't tend to think about things in terms of that. Like, I really like to be just present in my current situation. Like, I really don't have anything that I'm like working towards. It's always very much like, what's the next thing? What's right in front of me? Because I think it's easy to get disillusioned if you think you have this like ultimate goal or something. Um, I don't know. That wasn't really an answer to your question, but it was a pretty good dodge, I think.
No, that's totally fair. I always like to have a few people that I just feel like it would be great to see this person collaborate with, or I just feel like it would be interesting to see what you guys come up with together.
Yeah.
A few are Mild High Club, who's one of my favorites,
Yeah.
uh, Jerry Paper as
Hmm.
well, and just to kind of throw it off a little bit, Stephen Malkmus from Pavement is another.
I listened to a lot of Pavement in high school, and even though I don't really listen to them anymore, I think it like definitely left a permanent mark on my like songwriting style because that was when I was just beginning to write songs. So yeah, there's definitely some of that DNA like still there.
Right. And I read that you're a big David Berman fan
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
And
that too.
he's the GOAT.
Yeah,
I really love the American Water album. I've been listening to that a lot this last year.
yeah, that's one of my favorites of all time for sure.
Question number 4 is what's on your musical rotation right now?
Mm, great question. Let me pull it up because I have it right here.
Nice.
What I've been listening to. I've been listening to a lot of Lonnie Liston Smith and Benny Maupin. They both played in Miles Davis's bands in like the electric era, and then they kind of spun off and created. They didn't. I don't know if they created, but like they made a lot of spiritual jazz, and then like that sort of like morphed into smooth jazz. But that moment in between is like this amazing thing where it can be very like intense and tumultuous, but it can also be like so sweet and beautiful. And it's like right at the moment when everything was just changing from like this very serious diehard jazz experimentation to like this very popular form of like sweet beautiful music.
Interesting. What are they called?
Lonnie Liston Smith, he's a keyboard player, and then Benny Maupin, he plays like saxophone and all sorts of wind instruments.
Gotcha. So do they work together or is it separate?
Yeah, I think they probably played on each other's albums, and they both played with a lot of other jazz artists. But yeah, I don't really know. I'm not like an expert on that whole scene, but that's the music that I put on when I just am like cleaning or like doing something and I just like want to feel good, basically.
Gotcha. Well, I'll have to check them out for sure.
Yeah,
All right. Well, the last question here before we're off is what is your favorite decade of music?
that's a good question. I feel like if I had to pick one, I'd probably say the 70s because that's where like a lot of my inspiration tends to come from. I also think that it's very dangerous to get yourself siloed in like a single decade and like devote yourself too much to like exactly how they did things. You know, I feel like it's really cool to take inspiration from something and then do something that's like the opposite of what they would do, or like something that would probably uh, piss off the person who you are being inspired by. Like there, you always have to do something to make it different and new.
Totally. Yeah, I know what you mean about if people who only listen to one thing. I always think about the old guy that's like, oh, music these days, like it's not even close to as good as it was back then. And
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite decades for sure is 2010s, but
Hmm.
70s is great, and 70s is a very popular answer actually, because
Yeah.
there's just, it's like right after the 60s when the huge pop explosion happened and the Beatles just changed everything. And but before the 80s where shit got really like really compressed kind of.
Hmm.
And I mean there's some great stuff in every era and there's some shitty stuff in every era too. You
Absolutely.
can't deny that.
I agree. And yeah, I mean, I take a lot of inspiration from the 60s, the 80s, the 90s, like, and like things that like my friends are doing right now are obviously huge inspirations to me. So my friends' music is like right up there with like any of my favorite music from the 70s. So yeah,
Nice. Well, Ben Varian, thank you for joining me for an episode of On That Note. It was awesome getting to talk to you about your creative process behind 100 Breakfasts with the book, which everybody needs to go check out right now on Spotify, Bandcamp, and all that good stuff. And yeah, I really appreciate talking with you, man.
thanks for having me. It was great.
Of course. All right, Ben, I'll talk to you later.
All right, see ya.
Then your thoughts and you just get bored.
Thank you again for joining me for another episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. If you haven't yet, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and you can even leave a comment down below to let me know who you're listening to. On that note, I'll see you guys next time.